Chapter 151, The Witch Trial. Zadie. The crowd was buzzing with anticipation, their eagerness overwhelming me a bit as I forced myself to remain focused on the trial. I scanned the room, looking for any sign of Lynn or Lumina, and near the front of the room, I spotted Lynn and Lumina being escorted to their seats by guards. Instead of chains or restraints, they were simply flanked by pack warriors. It was a small mercy I'd been able to negotiate with the elders earlier today. I didn't want the pack to know that their Luna was being held captive for a crime that they didn't commit. And I needed to make it up to Lumina and Lynn somehow. Lynn's eyes found mine immediately, and the hatred burning in her eyes was so intense it nearly made me stagger. I forced myself to look away and took my place at the front of the hall, where the Elder Council was already seated. All the elders were there, old men that my father had appointed who were the ones who made new rules or put away existing ones. Simon looked particularly pleased with himself, no doubt anticipating the spectacle of watching Lynn pay for his crimes with his life. I raised my hand for silence, and the crowd immediately quieted, seeing this as they were all waiting for me. Members of the Shadow Moon Pack, I began, my voice carrying easily through the large space, feeling all eyes on me. We are gathered here today to witness the trial of a witch who has committed crimes against our people and our laws. Murmurs of approval rippled through the audience as they started murmuring amongst themselves before quieting down, not wanting to miss anything. They were expecting justice, expecting to see the magical threat to their community eliminated once and for all. Rivers, I called to my beta, who was standing near the side entrance, his hands behind his back, waiting for me. Bring in the accused. He bowed his head once and went outside, while we were all waiting for him. I could see Lynn's face get more paler as she fixed her eyes on the entrance, waiting, her hands clenched together in anticipation. Lumina was holding her hand tightly, as if trying to discourage her from doing something stupid, but she avoided my gaze as well. She wasn't going to forgive me for this betrayal either. There was a commotion outside, shouting, struggling, the sound of someone being forcibly dragged against their will. The crowd turned toward the entrance with anticipation, ready to see the witch who had dared to use forbidden magic on their territory. Rivers burst through the doors, dragging a woman behind him with enough force that she stumbled and fell when he released her. He threw her down in front of my chair like she was nothing more than a sack of grain, and the entire assembly gasped in shock. It wasn't Lynn lying on the floor in front of me. It was Amaya, Simon's mate, her hands bound with lead cuffs and her face streaked with tears and dirt from whatever struggle had brought her here. I stood up slowly and walked over to where she was trying to push herself back to her feet. Without hesitation, I placed my boot on the back of her neck and pressed down, forcing her face against the cold stone floor. "Well, well, well," I said, letting my voice carry the cold satisfaction I actually felt for the first time in days. "How ironic to meet you like this, Simon's mate." Rivers stepped forward and dumped the contents of a large bag onto the floor beside Amaya's prone form. Dark crystals, dried herbs, bones carved with symbols, ritual knives, all the tools of dark witchcraft scattered across the stone like evidence of guilt. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations and angry shouts. No one had expected this twist, least of all the Elder Council, who were staring at the scene with obvious confusion and growing alarm. Simon shot to his feet, his face purple with rage, as he pointed an accusatory finger at me. "What the hell is this?" he shouted over the noise of the crowd. "This is some kind of sick joke. My mate is not a witch." I pressed my foot down harder on Amaya's neck, enjoying the way she whimpered under the pressure. "Your mate," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "has been practicing dark magic for years. She's the one who created the curse that was slowly killing Ollie. She's the one who used forbidden witchcraft to drain the life from an innocent child." The lie rolled off my tongue as smoothly as honey, backed up by the planted evidence Rivers had scattered and the theatrical performance I was giving. The crowd was eating it up, their anger shifting from the absent Lynn to the woman currently pinned beneath my boot. "This is impossible," Simon sputtered, but I could see doubt beginning to creep into his expression as he looked at the damning evidence surrounding his mate. "Is it?" I asked, finally removing my foot and allowing Amaya to lift her head. "Tell me, Simon, where was your mate the night Ollie first became ill? Where was she when the magical attacks on him began? I think if we investigate thoroughly, we'll find that every incident coincides perfectly with your mate's whereabouts." Of course, none of that was true. Amaya was guilty of nothing more than being married to a man I needed to destroy. But the crowd didn't know that, and the evidence Rivers had planted would support whatever story I chose to tell. I looked out at the sea of faces staring back at me, all of them waiting to see what justice would look like for this unexpected revelation. In the front row, Lynn was watching with obvious confusion, clearly trying to understand what was happening and why I wasn't dragging Lynn out to face execution. This was my gamble, my desperate attempt to save the people I cared about while destroying the enemies who threatened them. I just hoped it would work. Chapter 152, The Perfect Frame. Zadie. Simon's face went through several shades of red as he sputtered in outrage, pointing frantically between me and his bound mate. "This is absolutely ridiculous," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You're all being manipulated. The real witch is Lynn. He's the one who used magic in our territory. Zadie is protecting him because of some misguided loyalty." I had to admire his quick thinking, trying to redirect the crowd's attention back to the original target. But I'd been counting on exactly this response, and I was ready for it. "Really, Simon?" I said, my voice dripping with skepticism, as I gestured to the evidence scattered around Amaya's prone form. "Then explain how your mate came to possess all of these dark magical artifacts. Explain why she has books on curse weaving hidden in your home." The crowd was murmuring among themselves, and I could see doubt beginning to spread through their ranks. But Simon wasn't going down without a fight. "Lynn is a witch," he insisted, his voice rising to nearly a shriek. "I've seen him use magic with my own eyes. He's been practicing forbidden arts for years, and now Zadie is covering it up because they're mates." I expected the crowd to turn on me then, to demand explanations about my relationship with Lynn and why I might be motivated to protect him. Instead, something beautiful happened. My pack members began defending Lynn themselves. "Even if Lynn was a witch, he's never hurt anyone," called out Maria Santos, a mother whose children Lynn had helped during a particularly bad flu outbreak. "He spent years helping our families, healing our sick." "Lynn saved my daughter's life when the doctors said there was nothing they could do," added Thomas Rivera, pushing forward through the crowd. "If he has magical abilities, he's only ever used them to help people." More voices joined in, a chorus of testimonials about Lynn's kindness and generosity over the years. People talked about how he'd stayed up all night caring for their elderly parents, how he'd refused payment for his medical services when families couldn't afford them, how he'd never once turned away someone who needed help. "A good witch is still better than whatever evil that woman has been practicing," someone shouted from the back, and several people voiced their agreement. I felt a surge of pride and vindication hearing my pack defend Lynn so passionately. They knew his character, knew the kind of man he was, and they weren't going to let Simon's accusations destroy their opinion of him. But then the conversation took an even more interesting turn as people who had been wronged by Amaya over the years began speaking up. "I always knew there was something wrong with her," declared Elena Vasquez, the woman who ran our pack's main bakery. "She demanded free pastries for months, said I should feel honored to serve an elder's mate. When I finally asked for payment, she cursed my ovens. They broke down 3 times in 1 week. She tried to steal my husband," added another voice. "Said an elder's mate deserved whatever she wanted, and I was lucky she was even allowing me to keep him. She made my mother cry at the market last month, called her a worthless old woman. Amaya had my son banned from pack events because he accidentally spilled juice on her dress. She's been a monster hiding behind Simon's authority." More and more stories poured out, tales of Amaya's cruelty, her entitled behavior, her threats against anyone who dared to cross her. People who had been too afraid to speak up before were finally finding their voices, emboldened by the evidence of her magical crimes. Amaya's composure finally cracked completely under the weight of their accusations. "You all deserved it," she screamed. struggling against her restraints as she glared at the crowd with pure hatred. "You're nothing but peasants who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention I chose to give you. You should worship me, bow down to me. I am your superior in every way." Her words sealed her fate completely. Whatever sympathy she might have garnered from being falsely accused of witchcraft evaporated in the face of her arrogant confession. The crowd's angry murmur grew to a roar of outrage. That was when Rivers stepped forward with the tablet he'd been carrying, holding it up so everyone could see the screen. "I think everyone needs to see this," he announced loudly. The footage began playing, security camera video from the hospital showing Simon directing the two captive witches as they used their powers against Lynn and Lumina. The crowd watched in shocked silence as magical energy surrounded my pack members, forcing them to their knees in obvious agony while Simon stood by with cold satisfaction on his face. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Pack members began shouting in fury, their voices overlapping as they processed what they were seeing. "He's been keeping witches prisoner. He was using magic against our Luna. This was all a setup to get rid of our leadership. He's been planning a coup." I watched Simon's face go white as he realized his carefully laid plans were crumbling around him. He opened his mouth to try to defend himself, but the crowd wasn't interested in hearing his explanations anymore. They'd seen the evidence with their own eyes, heard Amaya's arrogant confession, witnessed the proof of his conspiracy against their Alpha and Luna. "Guards," I called out, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Arrest Elder Simon and the other 3 elders who participated in this conspiracy. They'll face trial for treason, conspiracy, and the illegal use of magical coercion against pack members." The crowd erupted in cheers as the guards moved forward to restrain Simon and his co-conspirators. The other elders tried to protest their innocence, but no one was listening anymore. They'd been caught red-handed in their plot to overthrow the pack's legitimate leadership. Rivers leaned close to my ear as the guards dragged the conspirators away. "I can't believe that actually worked," he whispered, barely containing his amazement. I chuckled softly, shaking my head at the surreal turn my life had taken. Sometimes the best way to fight dirty politics is with even dirtier politics, I replied quietly. The truth was, while I'd fabricated Amaya's involvement in witchcraft, Simon and his allies really had done everything else they were being accused of. They had kept witches prisoner, had used magical coercion against my pack members, had conspired to remove me from power. I'd simply added one fictional crime to a list of very real ones. The crowd was still celebrating when I spotted Lynn and Lumina being escorted into the hall by their guards. Lynn's face was a mask of confusion and disbelief as she tried to process what had just happened. "Zayde," she said as soon as she was close enough to speak without shouting. "How did you know Amaya was a witch? When did you discover her involvement?" I met her eyes steadily, knowing this conversation would determine whether I'd truly saved our family or simply postponed our destruction. "She's not a witch," I said simply. "I planted all that evidence on her." Lynn's mouth fell open in shock. "You, what?" "Simon wanted to destroy my mate and you in extension," I said, my voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "He was willing to use false accusations and manufactured evidence to do it, so I decided to play his game, but better than he ever could." I looked between Lynn and Lumina, knowing they deserved the complete truth. "I fucked up once before, when I let fear and prejudice cloud my judgment about Lynn. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. Despite everything, the law, the tradition, the political consequences, Lynn is my mate, and I protect what's mine." Lumina's face crumpled with relief, and she threw herself into my arms, sobbing against my chest. "Ollie," she managed to choke out between tears. "Is he really okay?" "He's awake and asking for you," I assured her, holding her tight as she cried. "The spell is broken, and he's going to make a full recovery. You can see him as soon as you're ready." Lynn was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I need to apologize," she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. "You don't owe me any apologies," I said firmly. "I needed our confrontation to look real, so the elders would believe I was really willing to sacrifice Lynn. Rivers needed time to gather the evidence and set up the frame job. Your anger sold the performance perfectly." She nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "Where's Lynn now?" "Private medical suite on the top floor," I replied. "He's still unconscious, but the doctors say he should wake up within the next few hours. The magical drain from saving Ollie took a lot out of him." I looked out at my pack, who were still celebrating the downfall of the corrupt elders who had tried to destroy their leadership. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe freely. "It's over," I said, more to myself than to anyone else. "It's finally over." Chapter 153, The Family Hunt. Xenos. The scent trail through the forest was easy enough to follow, without doubting if we were headed the right way, even for someone whose tracking skills were probably that of a novice. Sophia's blood had left a clear path through the forest, especially on the undergrowth, dark droplets on leaves and trees' bark that told the story of her desperate flee from my parents' penthouse. I walked behind my parents, watching the way they moved together, walking hand in hand like predators who had hunted as a pack for decades. My father kept his nose and eyes to the ground, focused on following the scent without leading us astray, while my mum walked beside him holding a red jerry can in her hand that sloshed ominously with each step. The anger I felt toward Sophia burned hot in my chest, but it was also tempered off a bit by a growing unease about what exactly my parents had planned for her. I'd expected them to want justice for her crimes, but there was something about their calmness and efficiency that made my skin crawl. "Shouldn't we have brought more guards?" I asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the small hunting party. "If we're taking her back to face the Elder Council, we'll need proper restraints to keep her from absconding again, and we also need to gather witnesses to ensure the trial is legitimate and fair." My mother glanced back at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes as she replied. "Oh, sweetheart," she said in the same tone she might use to discuss weekend plans. "Between the three of us, we'll be more than enough to carry out justice." Something about the way she said "carry out justice" made my stomach twist a bit with anxiety and apprehension. I had no idea just what my mum was capable of, and I wasn't sure if I truly wanted to find out. "Mom, what exactly are you planning to do?" But before she could answer, my father held up a hand for silence as we both stopped moving. "Found her," he said quietly, pointing toward a cluster of trees about 50 yards ahead. We approached cautiously, and I could see Sophia as she was huddled against the bark of a huge oak tree. Her remaining arm was wrapped around her torso as she tried to stop the flow of blood from her shoulder. She looked up as we came out from the underbrush. Her face was squeezed with pain and desperation. Even wounded and weakened, she still tried to put up a fight, not the kind willing to back down from anything. As we got closer, she pushed herself to her feet and attempted to run. But the blood loss had left her unsteady and slow as she staggered, almost tripping, and her balance was way off point. My mother caught up to her in 3 quick strides and slashed at her legs with extended claws, sending Sophia crashing back to the forest floor with a scream of agony. "Please," Sophia gasped, crawling toward me with her remaining arm outstretched, trying to seek help and shelter from me, trying to appeal to my sense of humanity and kindness that I was known for. Kindness that she has manipulated, making me blind to the fact that she was destroying my family. Kindness that had made me her slave under compulsion for 6 years, always holding on to the past and choosing her over my mate. Blood streamed down her face from a gash on her scalp, and her eyes were wild with panic as she looked at me with desperate hope as she said, "Xenos, please save me. We can start over, just the 2 of us. Now that I've gotten rid of Riley and Ollie and Lumina, nobody will ever come between us again." The casual way she spoke about trying to murder my sons and my mate, as if their deaths would have been nothing more than clearing obstacles from her path to me, sent a wave of revulsion through my entire body. I stepped back from her outstretched hand like she was diseased. "You're insane," I said, my voice thick with disgust. "You tried to kill innocent children for no reason at all, then to suit your evil plans. You murdered my sister. You're going to suffer for every crime you've committed, and then you're going to be taken back to the city to face proper judgment." Sophia's face crumpled as she realized I wasn't going to save her from what she deserved. But I love you, she whispered, tears mixing with the blood on her cheeks. Everything I did was for us, for our future together. Can't you see that? What I see, I replied coldly, is a monster who destroyed lives for her own selfish desires. That was when my mother stepped forward with the jerry can, unscrewing the cap with deliberate slowness. The sharp smell of gasoline filled the air, and Sophia's eyes went wide with terror as she understood what was about to happen. No, she screamed, trying to scramble away on her belly like a wounded animal, still struggling not to give up even when all hope seemed lost. No, no, no. Please don't do this. I'll confess to everything. I'll tell everyone what I did. Just please don't burn me. My mother began pouring the gasoline over Sophia's body, ignoring her shrieks and pleas as the liquid soaked into her clothes and hair. The acrid smell was overwhelming, making my eyes water as I watched the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. This is for Zena, my mother said calmly, emptying the last of the gasoline onto Sophia's writhing form, and for trying to murder my grandson Riley. My father pulled out a lighter, flicking it open with practiced ease. Any last words? He asked Sophia, his tone conversational. Sophia was sobbing hysterically, her remaining hand clawing at the gasoline-soaked ground as she tried desperately to get away. Please, she whimpered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Of course you didn't mean for it to happen, my father replied with a slight smile. You meant for it to succeed. He dropped the lighter. Chapter 154, Family Justice. Xenos. The flames caught instantly, racing across Sophia's gasoline-soaked body with a whoosh that made me instinctively step backward. Her screams reached a pitch I didn't know human voices could achieve, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the forest and sent birds fleeing from nearby trees. I stood frozen, unable to look away as Sophia rolled on the ground in a desperate attempt to extinguish the flames that were consuming her. The smell of burning flesh mixed with the gasoline fumes, creating a nauseating cocktail that made my stomach heave. My parents watched the entire spectacle with the detached interest of people observing a mildly entertaining television program. There was no horror in their expressions, no regret or second thoughts about what they were doing. They simply stood there, arms crossed, waiting for the screaming to stop. It took longer than I expected. Sophia's supernatural healing abilities meant she stayed conscious far longer than a normal human would have, experiencing every second of the fire consuming her flesh. Her screams gradually became weaker, more ragged, until finally they faded to nothing more than wet, gasping sounds. When it was finally over, when the flames had died down to smoldering embers, and Sophia's charred remains lay still among the fallen leaves, my mother let out a satisfied sigh. Well, she said cheerfully, brushing ash off her hands like she'd just finished gardening. That was cathartic. I should have done that years ago when she first started sniffing around you. My father chuckled, wrapping an arm around her waist as they both admired their handiwork. You always were thorough in your problem-solving, dear. It's one of my most attractive qualities, my mother replied with a grin. I stared at them both, my mind struggling to process what I'd just witnessed. These were the people who had raised me, who had taught me about honor and justice and doing the right thing, and they had just burned a woman alive in front of me like it was the most natural thing in the world. How can you both be so calm about this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother looked at me with genuine confusion. Calm about what? We eliminated a threat to our family. It's what any reasonable parent would do. She was still a person, I protested weakly. There are laws, procedures, proper channels for dealing with criminals. Laws are for people who don't have the power to dispense justice themselves, my father said matter-of-factly. We're not ordinary citizens, Xenois. We're apex predators. We make our own rules. My mother nodded in agreement, then her expression shifted to something that might have been regret. Speaking of which, she said with a heavy sigh, I'm going to have to apologize to Lumina for all this mess, aren't I? Kill me now. The casual way she transitioned from discussing murder to worrying about family relationships was so absurd that I almost laughed despite everything. You're worried about apologizing to Lumina? I asked incredulously. Well, of course I am, my mother replied, as if this should be obvious. I tried my best to hate Lumina because I thought she had murdered my child, but she's not the woman I thought she was. She's good for you, and she's given me beautiful grandchildren. The fact that my past decisions about Sophia created problems for her marriage makes me feel terrible. Your past decisions? I repeated. Oh yes, she said brightly. I'm the one who introduced you to Sophia in the first place, remember? I thought she'd be a suitable match for you. Obviously, I was wrong about her character, but how was I supposed to know she was a murderous psychopath? She hid it very well. We began walking back toward where we'd left the car, my parents chatting easily about dinner plans and whether we needed to stop for groceries on the way home. It was surreal, listening to them discuss mundane domestic concerns while the smell of charred flesh still clung to our clothes. Do you think Riley will want pizza tonight? My father asked. Or should we cook something more substantial? He's been through a lot today. Pizza sounds perfect, my mother replied. Easy, comforting, and no one has to spend hours in the kitchen. We can order from that place he likes with the extra cheese. I walked behind them, my phone buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out to see Thorne's name on the caller ID. Thorne? I answered. Xenoace, thank God, came his relieved voice through the speaker. Riley's awake. He's asking for you and the doctors say he's going to make a full recovery. You need to get back here as soon as possible. Relief flooded through me so intensely that my knees nearly buckled. He's really okay? The spell is completely broken? Completely, Thorne confirmed. Whatever that witch did, it worked perfectly. He's weak and tired, but he's going to be fine. Carol says there shouldn't be any lasting effects from the magical trauma. I felt tears prick at my eyes as the full weight of the day's events finally hit me. My son was alive. My son was safe. The threat that had nearly destroyed my family was gone forever, burned to ash in the forest behind us. We're on our way, I said, quickening my pace to catch up with my parents. Tell Riley his father is coming and that everything is going to be all right. Will do, Thorne replied. And Xenoace? I'm sorry about Sophia. I know this couldn't have been easy for you. I glanced back at the column of smoke still rising from the forest floor. It was exactly as easy as it needed to be, I said, surprised by the conviction in my own voice. After I hung up, my mother looked at me with raised eyebrows. Riley's awake? Awake and asking for us, I confirmed. The spell is broken, and he's going to be fine. Thank goodness, she said, genuine relief visible in her expression. I was so worried about that boy. Now we can all go home and pretend this whole nightmare never happened. What about the body? I asked, gesturing back toward the forest. My father shrugged. What body? I don't see any body. Do you see any body, dear? No body here, my mother agreed cheerfully. Just a nice family walk in the woods that ended with everyone going home safe and sound. I realized then that this was how my family had always operated. They eliminated threats efficiently and thoroughly, then moved on with their lives as if nothing had happened. It was probably how they'd survived and thrived for generations in a world full of supernatural politics and deadly enemies. The strange thing was, I found I didn't feel guilty about what had happened to Sophia. She had tried to murder children, she had killed my sister, she had torn apart families and destroyed lives for her own twisted desires. Maybe my parents' brand of justice was brutal and outside the law, but it was also final and absolute. As we reached the car and began the drive back to the penthouse, I realized that I was becoming more like them than I'd ever imagined possible. And for the first time in my life, that didn't frighten me. It felt like coming home. Chapter 155, The Long Drive. Xenoace. The drive to Zaid's territory felt endless, every mile stretching out like an eternity as guilt gnawed at my conscience. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white with tension, as I replayed the events of the past few days over and over in my mind. Behind me, Riley was absorbed in his tablet, the soft sounds of whatever game he was playing providing a backdrop to my internal torment. He looked so small in the back seat, still pale and fragile from his ordeal, and the sight of him made my chest tighten with regret. I'm a terrible father, I muttered, not really intending for Thorne to hear me. Of course, he heard me anyway. What are you talking about? He asked, turning in the passenger seat to look at me with concern. I left them, I said, my voice rough with emotion. I left Lumina and Ollie alone in a strange pack while I was off dealing with my own problems. What kind of mate abandons his family when they need him most? Thorn was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Xenois, it was 2 days. 2 days while you were desperately searching for your missing son. Lumina understands that. She's not going to blame you for trying to save Riley's life. But I should have been there, I insisted, the guilt eating away at me. I should have been supporting her while Ollie was sick, holding her hand, being the partner she deserves. Instead, I was running around the city chasing shadows while she faced everything alone. All you would have done is sit in a hospital hallway and wait for news, Thorn pointed out gently. At least this way, you were actively working to solve the problem. You found Riley, you broke the curse, you eliminated the threat. That's not the behavior of a terrible father. That's the behavior of someone who will do whatever it takes to protect his family. I wanted to argue with him, but deep down I knew he was right. Lumina would understand. She always understood, even when I didn't deserve her patience and forgiveness. It was one of the many reasons I loved her so completely. Of course my mate won't kill me, I said with a weak attempt at humor. Besides, I still have to explain about Riley to her. The thought of that conversation made my stomach clench with anxiety. How exactly was I supposed to tell Lumina that we had another son? How was I supposed to explain that somehow, impossibly, she had given birth to twins and neither of us had known about it for 6 years? I found myself muttering under my breath, trying to practice different ways to phrase the revelation. Lumina, honey, funny story about when you gave birth to Ollie. No, that sounded terrible. Remember when you were in labor? Well, apparently. That was even worse. You know, Thorn said, apparently catching some of my muttered attempts. I doubt Lumina knew she was pregnant with twins. That's what we need to find out. How this happened without anyone realizing it. I nodded, grateful for his practical approach to what felt like an impossible situation. You're right, there has to be an explanation. Doctors don't just miss an entire extra baby during delivery. Something else was going on. That was when everything went to hell. A thought hit me like a lightning bolt, so sudden and urgent that I couldn't think of anything else. My foot slammed on the brakes without any conscious decision from my brain, bringing our car to a screeching halt in the middle of the road. "Oh shit!" I yelled, the words torn from my throat by pure panic. The car lurched to a stop with enough force to throw us all forward against our seatbelts. Thorn immediately looked around wildly, his hand going to the door handle as he prepared for whatever emergency had caused our sudden stop. What? What happened?" he demanded, twisting in his seat to check on Riley in the back. "Did we hit something? Are you okay, buddy?" Riley was giggling at the sudden movement, apparently finding our dramatic stop more amusing than frightening. "That was fun," he said with a grin that reminded me so much of Lumina, it made my heart ache. "I forgot to get Lumina flowers," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "We need to go back. I can't show up empty-handed after leaving her alone for 2 days." The silence in the car was deafening. Thorn stared at me with an expression that suggested he was seriously considering homicide. "We have been driving for an hour," he roared, his voice reaching a pitch that probably scared wildlife for miles around. "So is that a no on the flowers?" I asked hopefully. "I swear to God, Xenois," Thorn said through gritted teeth, his hands clenching and unclenching like he was imagining them wrapped around my throat. "Drive this car before I kill you myself." I decided discretion was the better part of valor and pulled back onto the road, leaving the flower shop I'd spotted in my rearview mirror. Thorn was probably right. Showing up alive was probably more important than showing up with flowers. The rest of the drive passed in blessed silence, broken only by Riley's quiet gaming sounds and Thorn's occasional muttered threats against my life. By the time we reached the border of Zada's territory, I was actually looking forward to facing whatever reception awaited me, if only because it meant I could get out of the car and away from Thorn's murderous glare. The border guards looked up with obvious suspicion as we approached their checkpoint. They were both young wolves, probably barely out of their teens, and they took their duties very seriously as they examined our identification papers. "What's your business in Shadow Moon territory?" one of them asked, his tone professionally neutral but wary. Thorn leaned forward, his earlier annoyance with me apparently forgotten in the face of potential official obstacles. "We have access to enter Zaid's territory by invitation from Alpha Zeta himself," he said smoothly. The guard looked down at some kind of list on his clipboard, then back up at us with a frown. "Yeah, that was 2 days ago," he muttered dismissively. I watched Thorn's expression shift from professional courtesy to barely contained rage in the space of a heartbeat. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Did you just suggest that I should come out there and rip you into pieces?" Chapter 156, Misunderstandings and Revelations. Xenoas. The guard's face went white as he suddenly realized exactly who he was dealing with. These weren't ordinary visitors to be turned away with bureaucratic excuses. This was Thorn, whose reputation for violence preceded him wherever he went. Fortunately, I managed to grab Thorn's arm before he could get out of the car and demonstrate exactly why his reputation was so well deserved. "Easy," I said quietly. "Let's not start a diplomatic incident." The guards immediately waved us through, their earlier officialness replaced by obvious relief at not having to deal with an angry Thorn. As we drove past their checkpoint, I caught sight of one of them reaching for what was probably a phone to warn their superiors about our arrival. "You need to keep your anger on a leash," I told Thorn as we made our way through the pack's residential areas toward the hospital. "My anger is perfectly controlled," he replied stiffly. "I didn't actually hurt anyone. Only because I stopped you." Details. We pulled up to the hospital and got out of the car, Riley immediately bouncing on his toes with excitement at the prospect of seeing his mother and brother again. The sight of his enthusiasm helped ease some of the anxiety that had been building in my chest during the drive. "You go ahead and find your mate and son," Thorn said, lifting Riley into his arms with gentle care. "I'll come up later with Riley. You probably want a few minutes alone with them first." I felt a surge of gratitude toward my old friend. Despite his sometimes violent tendencies and his earlier threats to murder me over the flower incident, Thorn always seemed to understand exactly what I needed. "Thank you," I said sincerely, "for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you." He waved off my thanks with his free hand, already distracted by Riley's excited chatter about seeing his family again. I left them in the lobby and made my way to the reception desk, my heart pounding with anticipation. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, looked up with a professional smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Lumina Blackwood," I said. "She's here with her son, Ollie. I'm her mate." Her expression immediately brightened with recognition. "Oh yes, of course, she's on the 3rd floor, room 312. Alpha Zeta is with his mate right now, but I'm sure they won't mind the interruption." I thanked her and headed for the elevators, my steps quickening as I got closer to seeing Lumina again. 2 days felt like an eternity when you were separated from the person who made your world make sense. The 3rd floor was quiet, with only the soft sounds of medical equipment and muffled conversations coming from behind closed doors. I found room 312 easily enough and paused outside, suddenly nervous about what I was going to say. How do you apologize for abandoning your family during a crisis? How do you explain that you've discovered you have another son? How do you even begin to process everything that had happened? I decided to just wing it and pushed open the door, ready to throw myself on Lumina's mercy and beg for forgiveness. "Lumina, I'm so sorry," I began, then stopped dead in my tracks. There was someone on the hospital bed, and Zayde was leaning over them, his hands working to remove their clothes while he kissed them passionately. For one horrifying moment, my brain interpreted what I was seeing as Zayde taking advantage of my mate. Red-hot rage flooded through my system, obliterating every rational thought in my head. "You son of a bitch!" I roared, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. I grabbed Zayde by the shoulders and slammed him against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. His eyes went wide with shock and confusion as I pinned him there, my hands around his throat. "How dare you!" I snarled, my vision narrowing to a tunnel focused entirely on his face. "How dare you touch my mate?" "Xenois, wait," someone said from behind me, and a hand grabbed my arm. I spun around, ready to fight off whoever was trying to interfere, and found myself staring at a man I'd never seen before. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and concerned brown eyes, and he was very obviously not wearing a shirt. My brain short-circuited as I tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't Lumina. This was a man who had apparently been in bed with Zayde when I burst in. "Wait, what?" I said stupidly, my hands loosening on Zayde's throat. The man stepped closer, his expression shifting from concern to something that might have been amusement. "You must be Xenois," he said calmly, as if finding me choking his apparent lover against a hospital wall was a perfectly normal way to meet someone new. I released Zayde completely and stepped back, my mind struggling to catch up with this unexpected development. You're not. Where's Lumina?" Zayde rubbed his throat and straightened his shirt, his initial shock giving way to what looked like embarrassment. "She's with Ollie in the pediatric wing," he said hoarsely. "2 floors up, room 512. The man who wasn't Lumina extended his hand toward me with a slight smile. "I'm Lynn," he said simply. "Zayde's mate, and you just gave both of us the scare of our lives." I stared at his outstretched hand, then at Zayde, then back at Lynn, my brain still trying to process this information. Zayde had a mate. A male mate, who was not my wife. "Oh," I said weakly. "Oh, I'm really sorry. I saw you two and I assumed." I trailed off, realizing how ridiculous I must sound. Lynn's smile widened into something genuinely warm. "You assumed Zayde was taking advantage of your mate and decided to defend her honor. That's actually rather sweet, in a terrifying, nearly homicidal sort of way." "I really am sorry," I repeated, looking between them both. "I've had a very long few days, and I guess I'm not thinking clearly." Zayde waved off my apology, though he was still rubbing his throat where I'd grabbed him. "No harm done," he said. "Though next time, maybe try knocking first?" "Definitely," I agreed fervently. "Knocking is good. I like knocking." Lynn laughed, a sound that was genuinely amused rather than mocking. "Well, this is certainly one way to meet your rival," he said to Zayde. "Should I be worried that all the Blackwoods have such dramatic entrances?" "You have no idea," I muttered, thinking about my parents and their recent activities in the forest. I backed toward the door, suddenly desperate to get out of this increasingly awkward situation and find my actual family. "I should go," I said. "Lumina's probably wondering where I am, and I have a lot of explaining to do." "Good luck," Zayde called after me. "And Xenois? Your son is going to be fine. The curse is completely broken." I paused in the doorway, feeling a rush of gratitude toward this man I'd just tried to strangle. "Thank you," I said sincerely, "for everything you've done for my family. I owe you more than I can ever repay." "Just take care of them," he replied simply. "That's payment enough." I nodded and left them to their whatever they had been doing before I interrupted. The elevator ride to the 5th floor gave me a few minutes to collect myself and prepare for the conversation I actually needed to have. This time, I was definitely going to knock first. Chapter 157, Broken Promises, Lumina. I sat beside Ollie's hospital bed, watching my son stare at the ceiling with empty eyes that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. He'd been like this since I'd been released from the dungeon, and finally allowed to see him, withdrawn, quiet, speaking only in fragments that made no sense to me. The relief of seeing him alive and breathing had been overwhelming, but now I was faced with a different kind of terror. This wasn't my vibrant, talkative little boy who usually chattered nonstop about dinosaurs and adventures. This was a hollow shell of himself, and I had no idea how to reach him. "Ollie," I said softly, reaching out to smooth his dark hair away from his forehead. "Talk to me, sweetheart. Tell me what's wrong." He turned his head toward me, and for a moment his eyes brightened with something that looked like hope. But then it faded, replaced by that terrible emptiness that had been haunting his expression since I'd arrived. "Where's Daddy?" he whispered, his voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear him. He broke his promise. I felt my chest tighten with confusion and frustration. "What promise, baby? I don't understand what you're talking about." Ollie's face crumpled, and tears began rolling down his cheeks. He promised to look after Riley. He promised Riley would be safe, but they broke the magic, and now Riley's gone. The name hit me like a slap across the face, sending anger surging through my veins. Riley. Of course, this was about Riley, Sophia's son, the living, breathing evidence of my mate's betrayal during our marriage. "Ollie, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the rage building in my chest. "Riley is fine. He's back in the city with his mother. You don't need to worry about him." "No?" Ollie said with more passion than I'd heard from him since I'd arrived. "You don't understand. They shouldn't have broken the connection. I told them not to, but nobody listened to me." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that my son had been through trauma and wasn't thinking clearly. "Sweetheart, Sophia was using magic to drain your life force. She was trying to kill you to hurt our family. Breaking that connection saved your life." "I don't care," Ollie shouted, his small hands clenching into fists against the hospital blanket. "I wanted to help Riley. He was scared and alone, and I was the only one who could be with him. Now he's gone, and it's all my fault." The pain in his voice was genuine, and it tore at my maternal instincts even as I struggled to understand why he cared so much about a child I hated. To me, Riley represented everything that had gone wrong in my marriage. The proof that Xenois had been unfaithful, that he'd created another family while I was carrying his child. I tried so hard not to let my feelings about Riley's existence poison my relationship with Ollie, but it was difficult. Every time my son mentioned the other boy's name, it was like reopening a wound that had never properly healed. "Ollie," I said carefully, "I know you feel bad for Riley, but you need to understand that his mother did terrible things to our family. She tried to hurt you, tried to take you away from me. I don't want to hear about Riley anymore, okay? I just want to focus on getting you better and taking our family home." The effect of my words was immediate and devastating. Ollie's face went white with betrayal and fury, and he grabbed his favorite toy, a stuffed triceratops named Tricey, the last thing he had held onto in my past life before dying on his birthday from a heart attack, and hurled it against the wall with all the strength his small body could muster. "You're not listening," he screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. "Nobody ever listens. Riley needed me, and I failed him, and now he's gone forever." I felt tears sting my eyes as I watched my son fall apart, knowing that I was somehow making everything worse, but not understanding how to fix it. The rational part of my brain knew that Ollie's attachment to Riley was probably some kind of trauma response, but the wounded part of my heart couldn't separate the child from what he represented. Before I could figure out what to say next, the door opened behind me. I turned, expecting to see a nurse or doctor, but instead found myself looking at Xenois. Relief flooded through me at the sight of my mate, alive and whole, and finally here where he belonged. He moved toward me quickly, wrapping his arms around me from behind and pulling me against his chest. "I'm so sorry," he murmured against my ear, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. Sorry I left you alone to deal with all of this. I'm sorry for everything that's happened." I melted into his embrace despite my anger, my body recognizing its other half and responding instinctively to his presence. He kissed my cheek softly, his lips warm against my skin, and for a moment I let myself believe that everything might actually be okay. Then Xenois pulled away and turned toward Ollie's bed, clearly intending to check on our son, but Ollie immediately rolled away from him and pressed his face into his pillow. "Why did you break your promise?" Ollie said, his voice muffled by the fabric, but still audible. "You said you'd look after Riley, but you broke your promise, and now he's gone." I saw confusion flicker across Xenois' face. "What promise did I break, buddy? I don't understand what you're talking about." "You promised to look after Riley," Ollie repeated, turning back to face his father with tears streaming down his cheeks. "You promised he'd be safe, but I felt him disappear in the white light, and now he's gone, and it's all because I couldn't protect him." Xenois opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the door opened again. This time it was Thorn who entered, and my blood ran cold when I saw who was with him. Riley. The boy who represented everything I'd tried to forget about, everything that had helped destroy my marriage, was standing in my son's hospital room like he had every right to be there. He was smaller than when I last saw him, with dark hair that reminded me painfully of Xenois, and when he saw Ollie, his entire face lit up with joy. "Ollie!" he shouted, his voice bright with happiness and relief. Chapter 158, hidden truths. Lumina. The transformation in my son was instantaneous and miraculous. The hollow emptiness disappeared from his eyes, replaced by pure elation as he tried to scramble out of his hospital bed. Riley ran toward him, and they crashed into each other in a desperate hug, both boys crying as they clung to each other like lifelines. "I thought you were gone," Ollie sobbed into Riley's shoulder. "I felt you disappear, and I thought I'd never see you again." "I'm okay," Riley whispered back, his small hands fisted in Ollie's hospital gown. "I'm okay, and you're okay, and we're both safe now." I watched this reunion with growing horror and fury, my mind racing as I processed what this meant. If Riley was here, then Sophia had to be here too. The woman who had tried to murder my son, who had torn apart my family, who represented every nightmare that had plagued me for months, was somewhere in this building. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for days finally boiled over, and I felt my controls snap completely. "Thorn," I said sharply, my voice cutting through the boys' emotional reunion. "Watch the children." Then I turned to Xenois, my eyes blazing with fury. "You, hallway, now." I didn't wait for his response. I stormed out of the room, my heels clicking sharply against the hospital linoleum as I put distance between myself and the scene that had just unfolded. Behind me, I could hear Xenois following, his footsteps hesitant and uncertain. When we were far enough away that the boys wouldn't overhear, I whirled around to face my mate, all the anger and hurt and betrayal I'd been holding back finally exploding to the surface. "What the hell is the meaning of this disrespect?" I snarled, my voice low and dangerous. "How dare you bring that child here? How dare you bring his mother into our lives again after everything she's done?" Xenois held up his hands in a placating gesture, but I wasn't interested in being placated. Not anymore. "Lumina, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I interrupted, my voice rising despite my efforts to keep it controlled. "Explain why you've brought the evidence of your infidelity to our son's sickbed. Explain why you're forcing me to face the child you created while you were supposed to be faithful to me. Explain why Sophia is apparently here in this hospital where she can finish what she started with Ollie." "Sophia isn't here," Xenois said quickly, his eyes wide with something that looked like panic. She's not going to be a problem anymore." Something in his tone made me pause, my anger momentarily overshadowed by confusion. "What do you mean she's not going to be a problem? Where is she?" Xenois ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign that he was struggling with how much to tell me. "She's dead, Lumina. She's gone. She can't hurt anyone anymore." The simple statement hit me like a physical blow, leaving me staggered. "Dead? How? When?" "Does it matter?" Xenois asked quietly. "What matters is that the threat to our family is over. Riley is safe, Ollie is safe, you're safe. The nightmare is finally finished." I stared at him, trying to process this information while my emotions churned in chaotic waves. Relief that the woman who had terrorized us was gone. Confusion about how and when this had happened, and underneath it all, a growing suspicion that there was more to this story than Xenois was telling me. "You still haven't explained why Riley is here," I said, my voice calmer, but no less dangerous. "Dead mother or not, I don't want that child anywhere near our family." Pain flickered across Xenois' features, and he took a step closer to me. "Lumina, there are things about Riley that you don't understand. Things that change everything." "Such as?" He took a deep breath, and I could see him gathering his courage for whatever revelation was coming next. "Riley is our son." The words hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. I felt my brain struggling to process what he'd just said. Rejection and disbelief warring with a terrible, growing certainty. "That's impossible," I whispered, but even as I said the words, I was thinking about Riley's dark hair, his familiar features, the way Ollie had reacted to seeing him. "When you gave birth to Ollie, you were carrying twins," Xenois said gently. "Somehow, through magic or manipulation or something else entirely, Riley was taken from us. We never knew he existed until a few days ago." I felt the world tilt sideways as the implications of his words crashed over me. Twins. I'd been pregnant with twins and never known it. My baby, my other son, had been stolen from me before I'd even had a chance to hold him. The rage I'd felt toward Riley, the resentment and bitter jealousy, transformed into something else entirely, a a primal, maternal fury that made my earlier anger seem like a gentle breeze. "Someone stole my baby," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying the promise of violence. "Yes," Xenos confirmed, "and now we have him back. Both our sons are safe, and the person responsible for separating us is gone. We can finally be the family we were always meant to be." I looked back toward Ollie's room where I could hear the faint sounds of the boys talking excitedly to each other and felt something shift inside me. The child I'd resented wasn't the evidence of my mate's betrayal. He was my son. My baby who had been stolen from me and raised by the woman who had tried to destroy us all. The fury burning in my chest wasn't going away, but it had found its proper target. Not Riley, not Xenos, but whoever had orchestrated this separation in the first place. "I want to know everything," I said, turning back to face my mate. "Every detail about how this happened, who was responsible, and what you did to them. And then I want to go home and start figuring out how to help both our sons heal from this trauma." Xenos nodded, relief visible in his posture. "I'll tell you everything. But first, don't you want to properly meet our son?" I looked toward the room again, hearing Riley's laughter mixing with Ollie's, and felt my heart break and mend itself simultaneously. "Yes," I whispered, tears starting to fall as the full weight of what I'd lost and found again hit me. "I want to meet my baby." Chapter 159, A Tearful Reunion, Lumina. I stood frozen in the hallway, my mind reeling from Xenos' revelation. Riley was my son, my baby. The child I'd spent months resenting was actually my own flesh and blood, stolen from me before I'd even known he existed. I didn't know how to process all this. It seemed surreal to me. A part of me was waiting for my mate to say it's a joke and bring out Sophia from where she was hiding, but he wouldn't be that cruel. My hands trembled as I stared back toward the hospital room where I could still hear the soft murmur of the boys' voices. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my marriage, about the past 6 years, had just been turned upside down. "I need proof," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I need to be absolutely certain. The last paternity test showed Sophia as his mother." Xenos nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "We'll get another test done immediately. But Lumina, I know this is hard to process, but I need you to trust me on this. Riley is ours." I took a shaky breath and walked back toward the room, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. When I pushed open the door, I saw both boys on Ollie's hospital bed, Riley curled up against my son's side as they whispered to each other in the way children do when they're sharing secrets. The sight hit me like a physical blow. They looked so similar. The same dark hair, the same stubborn chin, the same long eyelashes that reminded me of Xenos. How had I missed it before? How had I been so blinded by my own pain that I couldn't see what was right in front of me? Xenos moved past me and approached the bed gently. "Riley," he said softly, "there's someone who wants to properly meet you." Riley looked up at him with those familiar dark eyes, then shifted his gaze to me. I could see the hesitation there, the uncertainty of a child who had learned not to trust easily. My heart broke thinking about what he'd been through, what Sophia had put him through, while using him as a weapon against my family. I walked closer to the bed and knelt down so I was at eye level with both boys, my hands shaking as I tried to process the enormity of what was happening. Tears were already starting to fall, and I didn't bother trying to stop them. Riley scooted slightly closer, his small body tense with nervous energy. "Mrs. Lumina?" he said hesitantly, his voice so quiet I had to strain to hear it. The formal way he addressed me made my heart shatter into pieces. This was my baby, my son, and he was calling me Mrs. Lumina, like I was a stranger. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, tears streaming down my face as I opened my arms in invitation. "I'm so sorry," I managed to whisper. "I'm so sorry for everything." "It's not your fault at all," Riley said immediately, and I could hear an echo of Xenos in his voice. That same need to comfort others, even when he was the one who needed comforting. He moved closer, reaching out tentatively to take my hand. When our skin touched, I felt something click into place in my chest, that maternal recognition that I'd been too hurt and angry to acknowledge before. "I missed you so much," I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I didn't even know you existed, but somehow I missed you. There was always this emptiness, this feeling that something was missing from our family. Riley's eyes filled with tears as he looked into mine, searching for something I hoped desperately I could give him. Then, all at once, he threw himself into my arms, his small body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry," he cried against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry I helped Sophia hurt you. I didn't want to, but she made me and I couldn't stop it, and I hurt Ollie and I hurt you and I'm so sorry." I wrapped my arms around him, holding him as tightly as I dared, feeling like my heart might explode from the combination of love and rage coursing through my system. This was my baby, my son, and he was apologizing for things that had been done to him, not by him. "It wasn't your fault," I said fiercely, pulling back just enough to look at his tear-stained face. "None of it was your fault. You were just a little boy, and adults failed you. I failed you by not knowing you existed, by not being there to protect you." I pulled him close again, breathing in the scent of his hair and marveling at how right it felt to hold him. This was what had been missing from my life, not just Ollie's twin, but my other son. The piece of my heart I hadn't even known was gone. An hour later, I was sitting on Ollie's hospital bed with both boys curled up in my lap, Riley on one side and Ollie on the other. The weight of them against me felt perfect, like this was how we were always meant to be. Ollie was practically vibrating with excitement as he chattered away, his earlier depression completely forgotten now that his brother was back. "I knew it," he said for the 10th time, his voice filled with pride. "I kept trying to tell everyone that Riley was my brother, but nobody would listen to me. I kept having dreams about him, and I could feel him even when he wasn't here." "You were right about Sophia, too," Riley said quietly, his head resting against my shoulder. "You kept saying she was dangerous, but I couldn't see it. I thought she loved me." "She manipulated you," I said gently, running my fingers through his hair. "That wasn't your fault. Adults are supposed to protect children, not use them." Chapter 160. A New Villain. Lumina. "I felt everything Ollie felt when the curse was connecting us," Riley continued, his voice getting smaller. "I felt how scared he was, how much pain he was in. I wanted to help him, but I didn't know how. Ollie reached across my lap to grab Riley's hand. "You did help me. Even when you couldn't do anything else, you were there with me. I wasn't alone because I could feel you." The door opened, and Thorn entered carrying a manila envelope. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that looked suspiciously like dark amusement. "Well," he said, his voice carrying that sarcastic edge I knew so well, "I have some results that might interest everyone." He held up the envelope with theatrical flair. "Fresh DNA tests for both boys, processed with all the speed that emergency requests and substantial bribes can provide." Xenois stood up from where he'd been sitting by the window. "And..." Thorn's smile was sharp and satisfied. "Congratulations, Lumina. You're officially the mother of twins. Both boys show identical DNA markers confirming you as their biological mother." I felt a rush of relief so intense it made me dizzy. I'd known in my heart from the moment I held Riley, but having scientific confirmation made it real in a way that nothing else could. "Which means," Thorn continued, his voice growing darker, "that someone went to considerable trouble to falsify the original paternity test 6 years ago. Someone wanted you to believe Riley wasn't your son." The implications of what he was saying hit me like a slap across the face. This hadn't been an accident or a mistake. It had been a deliberate, calculated deception designed to tear apart my family. "Who?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Who did this to us?" Xenois moved closer to the bed, his expression grim. "That's what we need to find out. Thorn and I have been trying to remember details about when you gave birth, but everything from that time seems strangely fuzzy." I frowned, trying to recall the details of that day 6 years ago. It was strange. I could remember the pain, the fear, the relief when I heard Ollie crying for the first time, but everything else seemed to exist behind a kind of haze. "I can remember the doctor's name," I said, slowly. "But I never saw her again after the delivery, which I thought was odd at the time. Usually, your obstetrician follows up, but she just disappeared." "What was her name?" Thorn asked, pulling out a small notebook. "Andy," I replied. "Dr. Andy Kingston. She was a woman, probably in her 40s, with red hair and green eyes, very professional, very calm during the delivery." The effect of this information on both Xenois and Thorn was immediate and dramatic. They exchanged a look that spoke of shared recognition and growing alarm. Andy Kingston, Thorn repeated slowly. That name is familiar. She was related to Sophia, Xenois said, his voice tight with realization. Andy Kingston was Sophia's older sister. I felt cold dread settle in my stomach. Related to Sophia? But that would mean that your son was delivered by a member of the family that ended up raising him, Thorn finished grimly, which is one hell of a coincidence. It's not a coincidence, I said with growing certainty. This was planned. She was there to steal my baby. Xenois ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of processing overwhelming information. But that's impossible. Andy Kingston was banished from our territory over 10 years ago. She murdered someone, a rival pack member, I think. She couldn't have been practicing medicine in the city. Unless she was using magic to hide her identity, Thorn suggested. Or unless the banishment wasn't as permanent as everyone thought. I tightened my arms around both boys, feeling a surge of protective fury that made my earlier anger seem like a gentle breeze. Someone had stolen my baby, falsified medical records, and manipulated my entire family for years. There were always rumors about Andy, Thorn continued, his voice thoughtful. Even before the murder that got her banished, people whispered that she was studying dark arts, forbidden magic that could alter memories, change appearances, manipulate biological processes. Manipulate biological processes, I repeated, my mind racing. Like hiding a twin pregnancy from the mother? Like making medical tests show false results? Exactly like that, Xenois confirmed, his expression growing darker by the second. I looked down at Riley, who was listening to our conversation with wide, frightened eyes. My heart ached thinking about what this meant for him, that his entire existence had been orchestrated by people who saw him as nothing more than a weapon to be used against his real family. So Andy Kingston delivered my boys, somehow hid the fact that I was carrying twins, falsified paternity tests to make it look like Riley belonged to Sophia, and then disappeared, I summarized. All as part of some long-term plan to destroy our family. That's what it looks like. Thorn agreed. The question now is whether Andy is still alive, and if so, where she is. I felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. Whoever had done this to my family, whoever had stolen 6 years of my son's life and put him through the trauma of being raised by Sophia, was going to pay for what they'd done. Find her, I said quietly, my voice carrying a promise of violence. I don't care what it takes or how long it takes. Find the woman who stole my baby. Both boys had gone very quiet in my arms, sensing the dangerous shift in the room's atmosphere. I pressed a kiss to the top of each of their heads, trying to project calm and safety even as rage burned in my chest. Don't worry, I whispered to them both. Mama's gonna make sure no one ever hurts either of you again. Chapter 161. Shocking Revelation. Lynn. I was still sitting in my hospital bed, my face burning with embarrassment and confusion, when the door was suddenly kicked open with enough force to make me jump. Lynn practically bounced into the room, her usual infectious energy filling the space as she carried a wicker basket overflowing with fresh fruit. I brought you apples and oranges in those pears you like, she announced cheerfully, as a form of greeting that made me happy for a second that Zayde wasn't here. The doctor said you need to keep your strength up while you're recovering from the magical exhaustion, so I figured fresh fruit would be better than whatever garbage they're serving in the hospital cafeteria. I watched her bustle around the room, organizing the fruit and chattering about her morning, and felt some of my nervous tension ease. But I couldn't shake the memory of what had happened earlier, couldn't stop thinking about the feel of Zayde's lips against mine and the way he'd looked at me afterward, like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Zayde kissed me, I blurted out, the words escaping before I could stop them. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The basket slipped from Lynn's hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud as apples and oranges scattered across the linoleum. She stared at me with her mouth hanging open, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that probably shattered windows somewhere in the building. I quickly gestured for her to keep her voice down, glancing nervously toward the door. "Shh! Keep it quiet, will you?" The last thing I need is the entire hospital knowing about this." Lynn immediately lowered her voice, but her expression remained stunned as she quickly gathered the scattered fruit and shut the door behind her. She hurried to my bedside, setting the basket down with shaking hands. "Did you just say that Zadie kissed you?" she whispered, leaning closer like she was afraid someone might overhear. "Alpha Zadie? The same Alpha Zadie who spent years making homophobic comments and declaring that same-sex relationships are an abomination against nature?" I nodded miserably, running my hands through my hair as I tried to make sense of what had happened. "The very same. I'm as shocked as you are. Believe me." Lynn pulled up a chair and sat down, her expression shifting from shock to something that looked suspiciously like excitement. "Okay, I need details. All the details. Did you use magic on him?" I gave her a look that clearly conveyed my opinion of that suggestion. "Are you insane? That would be completely non-consensual manipulation. I would never do that to anyone, least of all him." "But you've been pining after him for years," Lynn pointed out reasonably, "and he's been nothing but hostile toward people like you. I just thought maybe you finally got frustrated enough to give him a little magical push in the right direction." "I don't care how frustrated I get," I said firmly. "Using magic to make someone kiss me would be rape, Lynn. It would be forcing him to do something he didn't want to do. I would never ever cross that line." Lynn held up her hands in a gesture of surrender. Okay, I get it. No magic involved, so he just kissed you out of nowhere?" I thought back to the moment, trying to piece together exactly what had led up to it. We were talking. He was asking about my injuries, being surprisingly gentle and caring. Then he just leaned down and kissed me, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "And what did you do?" Lynn asked eagerly, her eyes bright with curiosity. I felt heat rise in my cheeks again as I remembered my response. "I kissed him back." "What?" Lynn shouted again, then quickly clapped a hand over her mouth when I glared at her. Sorry, she whispered. "But seriously, Lynn, how could you do that?" I stared at her in disbelief. What was I supposed to do? Push him away? "This is something I've been dreaming about for years, Lynn. The man I've been in love with since for years finally kissed me, and you think I should have rejected him?" Before Lynn could respond, we heard footsteps in the hallway outside, followed by the sound of raised voices. I recognized one of the voices immediately. It was Xenoy's, and he sounded angry about something. Lynn immediately went on high alert, moving closer to the door to listen. "Wait," she whispered. "Is that Xenoy's out there?" I nodded, feeling my stomach twist with renewed anxiety. "He came by earlier. There was a bit of a misunderstanding." "What kind of misunderstanding?" I sighed, knowing I was going to have to explain the whole mortifying incident. "He walked in while Zadie and I were in the middle of things. He thought Zadie was taking advantage of his mate." Lynn's eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. "His mate? But you're not his mate." "I know that, and you know that, but apparently Xenoy's didn't know that. He thought I was Lumina, and when he saw Zadie leaning over me with my shirt off, he assumed the worst and tried to strangle him." "Oh my God," Lynn breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "That must have been terrifying." "It was certainly memorable," I said dryly. "Though I have to admit, there was something oddly romantic about having someone willing to defend my honor, even if it was based on a case of mistaken identity." We both went quiet as the voices in the hallway grew louder, then gradually faded as whoever was arguing moved away from our door. When silence returned, Lynn settled back into her chair and fixed me with a serious look. "So what happened after Xenois left?" she asked. This was the part I'd been dreading having to explain, because it was the part that hurt the most. Zadie looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. He couldn't even look at me. He just mumbled something about having things to take care of and left without saying another word. And he hasn't been back since? Chapter 162, Complicated Feelings. Lynn. I shook my head, feeling that familiar ache in my chest that came whenever I thought about Zade's reaction to what had happened between us. Not once. I keep waiting for him to come back, to explain what happened or at least acknowledge it. But nothing. It's like it never happened. Lynn reached out and took my hand, her expression softening with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Lynn. That must be really confusing and painful." I keep wondering if I did something wrong, I admitted quietly. Maybe I shouldn't have kissed him back. Maybe I should have stopped him before he did something he was going to regret. Don't you dare, Lynn said sharply, squeezing my hand. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. If anyone is at fault here, it's Zaid. I looked at her in confusion. How is Zaid at fault? He was probably just confused, or maybe the magical stress of everything that's been happening made him act impulsively. Lynn, listen to me, Lynn said, her voice intense. Do you know what Zayde did to get you released from the Elder's custody? I shook my head, realizing that I'd never actually gotten the full story of how I'd ended up free and in the hospital instead of in a cell awaiting trial. He broke pack law, Lynn continued. He interfered with a formal judicial proceeding, threatened the elders, framed someone for being a witch, and basically staged a one-man revolution to get you out of there. That's not the behavior of someone who's just being impulsive or confused. I felt my heart skip a beat as I processed what she was telling me. He did all that for me? He risked everything for you, Lynn confirmed. His position, his authority, probably his life if the elders had decided to make an example of him. That's not something you do for someone you don't have feelings for. I wanted to believe her and wanted to think that Zayde's actions meant something deeper than just a moment of weakness or confusion. But the memory of how he'd looked at me after the kiss, the horror and regret in his eyes, made it hard to hold on to hope. If he has feelings for me, then why did he run away? I asked. Why hasn't he come back to talk to me? Lynn was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through her answer carefully. Because he's terrified, she said finally. Think about it, Lynn. This is a man who spent his entire adult life building his identity around being the strong, traditional alpha who upholds conventional values. Discovering that he has feelings for another man probably feels like his entire world is falling apart. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but it made sense. Zayde's homophobia hadn't just been casual prejudice. It had been a cornerstone of his public persona for years. Having feelings for a man would challenge everything he believed about himself. So what am I supposed to do? I asked helplessly. Just wait around, hoping he figures himself out. What if he decides these feelings are wrong and tries to suppress them? What if he goes back to treating me like I'm some kind of abomination? I don't know, Lynn admitted. This is uncharted territory for both of you. But I do know that you can't control how he processes this, and you can't fix his internalized homophobia for him. What you can do is decide what you're willing to accept from him. I leaned back against my pillows, feeling exhausted by the emotional weight of everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to believe that Zayd's kiss had been the beginning of something real, something that could grow into the relationship I'd always dreamed of. But another part of me was terrified that it had been nothing more than a moment of weakness that he was already regretting. I've loved him for so long, I said quietly. Even when he was saying horrible things about people like me, even when he made it clear that he saw me as less than human, I couldn't stop loving him. I kept hoping that maybe someday he'd change, that maybe he'd see me as something more than just the weird Omega who practices magic. And now maybe he does, Lynn pointed out gently. Maybe breaking pack law to save you was his way of showing that you matter to him. Maybe the kiss was him finally admitting feelings he's been fighting for years. Or maybe he was just caught up in the moment and now he's horrified by what he did, I countered. Lynn sighed, recognizing that we were going in circles. You know what I think you should do? What? I think you should give him some space to figure himself out, but also set some boundaries about what you're willing to tolerate. You can't spend the rest of your life waiting for him to decide whether you're worth loving. If he wants to explore whatever this is between you, he needs to do it honestly and respectfully, and if he decides he can't handle it, then he needs to leave you alone so you can move on. I knew she was right, but the thought of actually losing Zayd forever made my chest hurt with a lot of grief I wasn't sure I could survive. What if he chooses to walk away? I whispered, scared that this might be a certainty more than him staying and trying to make it work between us. Lynn squeezed my hand again, her eyes soft with understanding as she knew where I was coming from. Then, at least you'll know where you stand, and you can start focusing on finding someone who isn't ashamed to love you." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. Outside my hospital room window, I could see the sun beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of better times. Finally, Lynn stood up and began arranging the fruit in the basket again, her movements gentle. "For what it's worth," she said without looking up, "I think he'll come back. The Zayde I saw when he was fighting the elders for you isn't the same man who used to make cruel jokes about same-sex couples. People can change, Lynn. Sometimes love is what finally makes them willing to do it." I hoped she was right, but until Zade walked through that door and proved it, all I could do was wait and try to prepare myself for whatever came next. The waiting was going to be the hardest part. Chapter 164, Cursed, Zadie. "I don't have a mate," I said through gritted teeth, "and I certainly don't care about Lynn." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, and my wolf's reaction was immediate and vicious. "Is that why you falsified information to frame Amaya for attempted murder? Because you don't care about Lynn? Is that why you broke pack law and defied the Council of Elders? Because he means nothing to you?" The reminder of what I'd done to protect Lynn sent a fresh wave of guilt and confusion through my system. I had committed crimes to keep him safe, had risked everything I'd built just to ensure he wouldn't be punished for something he hadn't done. That wasn't the behavior of someone who didn't care. "We've stayed away from our mate long enough," my wolf continued relentlessly. "The question is, do you actually hate Lynn, or do you just hate the idea of people seeing you differently because you're sleeping with a man you care about?" Before I could formulate an answer to that devastating question, the door to my office opened. Rivers stepped inside, his expression immediately shifting from casual to concerned as he took in the scene, the shattered window, the glass scattered across the floor, my disheveled appearance. "Alpha," he said carefully, "are you all right?" I looked at my second in command, this man who had been by my side for years, who had never judged me or questioned my decisions even when they made no sense. If I couldn't be honest with Rivers, I couldn't be honest with anyone. "I kissed Lynn," I said bluntly, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Rivers went very still, his eyes widening with shock. For a moment, I thought he might react with the disgust and disappointment I'd been expecting from everyone else. Instead, he started coughing, a nervous habit he'd had since we were teenagers. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" he asked, his voice slightly strangled. "I kissed Lynn," I repeated, the confession somehow easier the second time, "in his hospital room, and then I ran away like a coward when Xenois walked in on us." Rivers stared at me for a long moment, processing this information. Then, to my complete surprise, his expression softened into something that looked almost like relief. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," he said quietly. "This kind of attraction. It's more common than you think, Alpha. It's normal." I felt my anger flare again at his casual acceptance. "It's not normal," I snarled. "It's disgusting and wrong and completely inappropriate for someone in my position." Rivers took a step back, but his expression remained steady. "Why? Because he's a man? Because it doesn't fit with the image you think you need to project?" "Because I shouldn't be fantasizing about him," I exploded, the words pouring out in a torrent of self-loathing. "I shouldn't be imagining what he'd look like beneath me. Shouldn't be wondering what sounds he'd make when I cut myself off, horrified by what I'd almost revealed, but Rivers just nodded like he understood perfectly. "You care about him," he said simply. "There's nothing disgusting about that." "He's weak," I continued desperately, as if listing Lynn's perceived flaws could somehow diminish what I felt for him. "He's too emotional, too sensitive. He uses magic instead of physical strength, and he—" The door burst open again, cutting off my litany of criticisms. Lynn stood in the doorway, her face flushed with fury and her eyes blazing with protective rage. "How dare you?" she snarled, taking a step into the room. "How dare you say those things about my brother?" I opened my mouth to explain, to somehow justify the horrible things I'd been saying, but before I could form a single word, something went terribly wrong. A wave of agony crashed through my system, starting in my chest and radiating outward like liquid fire in my veins. I doubled over, my hands clutching at my shirt as pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced tore through my body. "What?" I started to say, but the words were cut off as blood filled my mouth. I spat crimson onto my office floor, staring at it in horror and confusion. This wasn't normal pain from an injury or illness. This was something else entirely, something that felt foreign and malevolent. Another wave hit me, this one strong enough to drive me to my knees. More blood poured from my mouth as I gasped for air that wouldn't come, my vision starting to blur around the edges. "Alpha!" Rivers shouted, rushing to my side as I collapsed completely. Through the haze of pain, I was dimly aware of Lynn kneeling beside me, her earlier anger replaced by panic. "What's happening to him?" she demanded. Rivers was pulling at my shirt, exposing my chest, and I heard him curse viciously. "Look at his skin," he said urgently. "Those markings weren't there before." I managed to focus enough to look down at myself, and what I saw sent ice through my veins. Dark lines were spreading across my torso like living tattoos, twisting and writhing beneath my skin in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Witchcraft," Lynn breathed, her voice filled with horror. "Someone's cursed him. This is killing magic. It's designed to destroy him slowly from the inside out." The revelation hit me like another physical blow. Someone wanted me dead, and they were using dark magic to accomplish it. But who? And why now? Another spasm of agony tore through me, and this time I couldn't hold back the scream that erupted from my throat. The curse was getting stronger, the pain more intense with each passing moment. "We need to get him help," Rivers said, his voice tight with panic. "We need to find someone who can break this curse before it kills him." Lynn was already on her feet, her earlier fury replaced by grim determination. "I know someone who might be able to help," she said, "but we need to move fast. Magic like this. It won't take long to finish what it started." As consciousness began to slip away from me, one thought echoed through my dying mind. I was going to die without ever telling Lynn how I really felt about him. The irony was almost enough to make me laugh, if I'd had the strength left to do it. Chapter 165. Gift of Choice, Lumina. I was folding the last of Ollie's hospital gowns that he had worn during our long stay in the hospital into our overnight bag when I noticed Xenois had gone completely still across the room, which was odd because I had no idea what would make him stop. He'd been packing Riley's few belongings that he had brought alongside the ride to Zayday's territory. A worn stuffed rabbit that had somehow survived his time with Sophia, his tablet, a couple of books the nurses had given him, but now he was just standing there, staring at nothing with that troubled expression on his face that made me realize that something was wrong somewhere. The sound of our boys' laughter echoed from the hallway, where they were running back and forth in the private corridor Zayday had arranged for us. It was the first time I'd heard Riley laugh with such pure joy, and the sound made my heart both soar and break at the same time. 6 years of his childhood had been stolen from us, but at least now we could give him the love and safety he deserved, without him having to wonder or fear if he was going to get punished for being a kid. "Lumina," Xenois said suddenly, his voice sounding heavy like he wanted to tell me something bad, which made me look up quickly from the bag I was packing. He dropped Riley's things onto the chair beside him and was walking toward me slowly, deliberately, with a pace he used when he was about to say something important. When he reached me, he gently took my hands in his, and I could feel the slight shaking in his fingers. I was beginning to get worried, too. Whatever it was, it had shook my mate this hard. "What's wrong?" I asked, searching his face for clues about what was troubling him. "Are you worried about the drive home? The boys will be fine, and the doctor said Riley is completely healthy despite everything he's been through." Xenois shook his head, his grip on my hands tightening slightly as he said, "It's not about the drive home," he said quietly. "It's about us. About what I've done to you." Before I could ask what he meant by that, I felt the unmistakable weight of alpha command settle over me as I immediately flinched. Closing my eyes shut as I waited with a bated breath for what was coming. But instead of the usual oppressive feeling of being forced into submission, this felt different, lighter, like the invisible chains that had been placed on me without my permission were being unlocked rather than tightened. By my authority as Alpha of Silver Creek Pack, Xenois said formally, his voice carrying the power that made every wolf in our territory instinctively obey. I hereby remove the territorial restriction placed on Lumina Blackwood. You are free to travel beyond pack borders without Alpha permission or escort. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I gasped as something inside my chest seemed to uncoil and expand. For a moment, I couldn't breathe properly as I tried to suck in oxygen greedily. I couldn't think about anything else, couldn't process what had just happened. The ban. The restriction that had kept me trapped in Silver Creek for 6 years, that had made me feel like a prisoner in my own home, that had reminded me every single day that I was there by force rather than choice, it was gone. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice barely audible as I opened my eyes and looked at him searching for answers that I wasn't sure I was going to get. Why are you doing this? Xenois released my hands and stepped back, running his fingers through his hair in that gesture I recognized as his way of dealing with overwhelming emotions. I should have done this a long time ago, he said, his voice thick with regret. Hell, I should never have let my mum Sylvia make me put that restriction on you in the first place. I sank down onto the edge of the hospital bed, my legs suddenly too unsteady to support me. 6 years. For 6 years, I hadn't been able to leave Silver Creek without explicit permission from an Alpha. I couldn't visit friends in other territories, couldn't take Ollie to see places beyond our borders, couldn't even go grocery shopping in the neighboring town without filing a formal request and waiting for approval. It had been one of the major reasons why I sat still like a mute and let Sophia treat me like shit all this while. It had made me feel like a slave, like property rather than a person. Even after I'd been cleared of Xena's murder, even after Xenois and I had been revealed as fated mates, the restriction had remained in place, a constant reminder that I was there under force, not by choice. The fact that you were desperate enough to call Zadie, Xenois continued, his voice growing more pained, and I knew why. Zadie and Xenois were enemies. The memory of him chasing after us in his wolf form and unable to cross the boundary because he didn't want to risk a war and had to watch me leave with my ex-lover and our son was a pain most alphas don't recover from, and it was one I was willing to let him suffer it. When you felt unsafe, when Sophia was threatening our family, that should never have happened. You should have been able to trust that I would protect you, that I would put our family first, that I would listen when you tried to warn me. Tears were already starting to fall, and I couldn't seem to stop them. Xenois? No, let me finish, he interrupted gently. Yes, I was being mind-controlled by Sophia. Yes, she was manipulating my thoughts and emotions to turn me against you. But that doesn't excuse everything I did wrong. It doesn't excuse the way I treated you before the mind control started, the way I let Sylvia force us into marriage, the way I made you feel like you had no choice in your own life.